Alright, let's talk about some Montreal Canadiens prospects. Because it's the holidays and because there's a little freeze up in the schedules, we got some time to actually talk about the players that we don't usually talk about. Now, I've been making Canadiens prospect videos throughout the year, talking about guys like Cole Caulfield and his crazy good NCAA season with the Wisconsin Badgers as a freshman. We've talked about Alexander Romanov and how he could potentially be coming to the Montreal Canadiens sooner rather than later. We talked about Cam Hillis and how good he's doing. We talked about Samuel Houde and how he's doing really well with Raphael Harvey-Pinard in the QMJHL for Chicoutimi. And there are a ton of other really good Montreal Canadiens prospects to cover, for sure. We're talking about one of them here today, and he's a player that I've already made one video about, but that video I made was all the way back when he was drafted. This is a player who I'm familiar with because he is from North Van, and as a result, playing in the WHL, a lot of the Vancouver Sportsnet radio talk shows would talk about him when it comes to talking about prospects. Let's talk about Gianni Fairbrother, who is a Montreal Canadiens draftee from the 2019 NHL Entry Draft. Fairbrother was drafted 77th overall, all the way over there in the 3rd round. Now, I remember right after Fairbrother was drafted, my initial reaction was, hey, they got that guy. That's the guy that they would talk about on the Prospect Show. That's the guy who's on the Everett Silvertips and who's good at getting shots on net and who's overall a pretty good defenseman. It's nice to see him get drafted. However, there wasn't that much of a positive reaction from the fan base because a lot of Canadiens fans were saying things like, okay, what about, I don't know, Pavel Dorofiev, who just went a few picks after, Anthony Honka, Mikko Kokkonen, Alex Bocage, all these players who were available that the Canadiens passed on in place for this WHL D-man. Now, right away, I was kind of on the positive side of things. I made a video talking about Fairbrother, his strengths, talking about how he could potentially become an NHL defenseman, talking about his track record, and what I liked about his play style. But I'm here today to make this video talking about how Gianni Fairbrother has gotten better. He's gotten way better, and in fact, he is very much looking like a player who probably should have been drafted a little bit higher than where he was taken. And honestly, it's a pretty good sign for a guy who's adding to an already deep left-handed defensive prospect core for the Montreal Canadiens. Gianni Fairbrother this year with the Everett Silvertips is at 21 points in 29 games played. That is a pretty impressive number for a draft plus one defenseman, but I will say that he's actually kind of taken a step back. Taking a look at Gianni Fairbrother's game log, he only has 1 point in his last 7 games, meaning that earlier in the season, he was at 22 games played and 20 points. He was at a really good just under a point per game pace, but he kind of went on a little bit of a slump. Despite that, however, it's really clear to see that the improvement with Gianni Fairbrother's game definitely does exist, especially when compared to his year last year, in his draft year where he got 36 points in 64 games. So the points per game has definitely increased, and the goal production right here is roughly around the same-ish. He's on pace for about the same amount of goals. He had 10 goals last year, he's at 5 this year. The assist column, though, has been racking up quite a bit. So taking a look at what Gianni Fairbrother has done, he's on pace to eclipse his WHL point total from last year, and in fact, it comes at a pretty opportune time. This year in the WHL, Gianni Fairbrother is all the way down there at 14th in total points, and in terms of points per game, he's all the way up there at 13th. He's one of the better U20 defensemen in the league, and the names he's beating out are pretty notable right here too. He's got more points and a higher points per game than Bowen Byram. He has more points than Ty Smith. He has much more points and a higher points per game than Jet Wu. So a lot of these defensemen are getting eclipsed by Gianni Fairbrother on the score sheet. Of course, that's just picking and pulling the individual names who he happens to have more points and a higher points per game than. But nonetheless, it's still pretty impressive to say that this guy drafted in the 3rd round is a better offensive producer this year than Bowen Byram is. And that's certainly not something that a lot of Habs fans could say that they expected. In my opinion, though, I think it's a pretty understandable thing, because Gianni Fairbrother has always been a player who was capable of getting a pretty good set of offensive production. It's just that he's not really focused on that all the way through. He's more of a two-way guy in terms of the way he plays the game. It's just that his offense is really heavily supported by his slap shot. We talked about this in the video I made earlier in the year, but Gianni Fairbrother is really oddly good at getting pucks towards the net. The guy shoots it a lot, and he always sets up a rebound or a goal for himself. He's got an absolute cannon, and he knows how to use it properly to always get things on net. This year, Gianni Fairbrother has been using that quite a lot to get these rebounds out in front, to get those really nice dirty goals for the Everett Silvertips, and in fact, the fact that he's playing for the Silvertips does also support his production, because the Silvertips have never really been a team that gets all too many goals. They're one of the best teams defensively, because their goals against is one of the best in the league, and they're always focused on the defensive game. But the offensive side of things doesn't really show all too much in the best favor for the Silvertips. It balances out because they're so good defensively, and that's how they remain competitive. But most of the players on that team all go under the same kind of style. Defense first, offense a little bit later. It's why Gianni Fairbrother and his production last year, in my opinion, was a little bit of a misdirection as to what kind of player Fairbrother is. Because he is capable of playing that two-way game. He kind of has to be. He plays on Everett. But the offensive side of him really does come through when he's given the opportunity. And this season, it's kind of been on the power play. The guy poaches up on that right face-off circle side. And every time he gets the puck, he's always in a position to shoot. He's never really up high in the zone. He's always squeaking in towards the net closer and closer. And once that pass comes over to him, bam, it's on net. Sets up a rebound in front, or he scores a pretty goal. When he doesn't shoot it though, he's really good at passing it back, using his vision, finding these really small seams to send it wing to wing right through the slot. He's had a number of assists and chances where I've seen him set things up by finding a small little thread and weaving the puck along through it. It's a really interesting skill set that he has, and it's even more interesting the fact that it's coming on a player that's a little bit more defensively oriented than a traditional offensive defenseman would be. But the way he's progressing in the WHL is really great, seeing him getting more points than guys like Smith and Byram, and he adds to what is a pretty good LHD core for the Habs. I said in my video back in the summer that I can see Fairbrother maxing out as a top 4 player, a guy who could probably play number 5 minutes on a blue line, and who could probably be good on a first unit penalty kill and a second unit power play. I still kind of see that now, especially with the depth that the Habs have. Their left-handed defenseman depth in the future does look like Romanov, Struble, Norlinder, Jordan Harris, and all these other really good players, so there's gonna be some competition if you want to crack the Habs blue line on the left side in a few years. But Fairbrother, to me, is up there with those guys, and he's a guy who I can totally see maxing out as an NHL defenseman one day. Sure, guys like Pavel Dorofeyev and all that were taken after Fairbrother, but still, I'm a big fan of Fairbrother. I have been for a while now, even before he was drafted, so it's really nice for me to see my second favorite team, the Canadiens, draft him in the 3rd round. Sure, maybe my West Coast bias is kind of showing. The guy's from North Van, he plays in the WHL, we talked about him on Vancouver Sportsnet talk shows. So I could be a little bit biased, but hey, you can't say that the player is not giving you reasons to be excited, right? I'm pretty sure most Habs fans are very open and accepting of the growth in production he has, and he's on pace to getting about 42, 43-ish points, which would be a pretty good improvement over what he was able to do last year. And taking out this 7-game slump that he's been on, he's actually at a much better points per game, on about for 55-ish points, which is a big improvement. Obviously, We can't tell the future on whether or not he's going to escape this slump, but the fact of the matter is, even with the slump, he's still a little bit better than Bowen Byram, so that's awesome to see. Habs fans, be excited for this guy, because I know I am. Hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.